Good afternoon and welcome to Perfect Wedding Guides February virtual luncheon. Did you get some snow? We got 7 inches at home. That's a lot of fun, isn't it? You got kids, I don't, but I still got out and played in it a little bit yesterday morning, but that was, that's who I am. So we're glad you're here today. The purpose of these luncheons are multi-fold. Number one is just to get together and share information. We've got some great information for you today. Also, it's just to network and get to see each other in a virtual way right now. But it's all good, and it's going to be over soon, we hope. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about today, this it's going to be over thing. So, Emily, tell us what's going to happen here.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about COVID and the impact that it's had on our industry. We've reached out to a couple of local experts who are going to really help us navigate how we can succeed and do well and survive the pandemic.
Yeah. Actually, Emily got to speak with an attorney that came to us through Pendra Snyder with Viva La Strings. Pendra said, hey, here's a great attorney. Go out and see if he'll talk. And he is going to talk, and you're going to gather a great bit of information from him.
We also have with us Craig Kohler from Kohler Catering, and he's going to tell us how he's been navigating COVID with his catering company and also his his venue that he also runs.
Awesome. Well, let's not waste any time. Let's get right into Emily's interview with Todd Bryant, an attorney.
Yeah, my name's Todd Bryant. I'm an attorney. My office is in Troy, Ohio, but I really work all over the greater Dayton area. My practice area is mostly kind of two things. I advise small businesses, help them write contracts, buy and sell, things like that. And then I also do a good deal with courtroom stuff, litigation when there's a dispute between two businesses, normally over contracts having to do with construction or manufacturing, but also I've had a lot of cases with service contracts, including a case I have going right now for a wedding venue issue that was brought up by COVID. And so I've kind of been in the trenches on this, and I've had at least 3 or 4 other clients that have called me to have them rewrite their contracts because they had an issue with COVID that they wanted to make sure to cover. And actually 2 of those have been folks in the wedding industry. One, a venue that when they could see that people were having to cancel and they were having to reschedule, what do we do? How do we handle this going on and protect ourselves? And then also I've had one that's a coordinator that, wanted to figure out what do I need to do because, you never know when people are going to have to cancel something at the last minute and you've already committed to resources to be in there at a certain time. And then also the concerns about liability over people catching COVID.
So you are an expert. We really appreciate your time today. Thank you for joining us. You touched a little bit already on contracts. So I think that is one of the big questions that we have is how to better protect ourselves as vendors and as venues, how to better protect ourselves with our contracts up front with the clients that we're seeking out for the 2021 bridal season and 2022 season. What are you suggesting to your clients right now?
So, a lot of contracts before this happened always kind of had what's called a force majeure clause. It's a Latin phrase, so I won't try to spell it, but basically a clause that says acts of God, things out of our control that happen, what's going to happen. And usually it gives, either party a right to cancel or get out. The problem is usually they list things like riots, terrorism, floods, earthquakes, etc., and nobody had really thought to put in, pandemics or health issues or orders of a government agency that you can't hold a certain event because of the number of people involved. And so the first thing a lot of people rush to do is to stuff, the pandemic into there. But really what's been coming up a lot lately, at least in my practice, is people wondering, especially in the wedding industry, because you're kind of living off of booking those weekend dates, what happens when somebody calls and says, hey, I don't want to have the wedding because we want 300 people and right now we can't do that. And so, the best thing to do is to have it in writing because that way, when the customer says, gee, why is there a change fee or something, you can point them back to the contract. So I guess for this purpose, I'm not going to so much talk about what to do when you haven't put it in the contract, because that's really kind of a thing that you really have to negotiate with people, because there is kind of a doctrine in the law that if something makes your contract impossible, then it may void the whole contract. And so from a customer service perspective, you don't just want to say to people, hey, sorry, I still expect to get paid, even though I'm not going to be doing anything for you. But going forward, writing into the contract, I think the best way to do it now is most people have in there a clause that says if you cancel this contract, I get to keep the deposit. You know, most people have some kind of deposit like that. What I've been writing in is letting you keep a deposit if the customer just changes their wedding date, or maybe the couple ends up, you know, breaking up before the wedding, or if they cancel for any reason relating to them, you still have your policy in place of whatever you normally do. What I've seen typically is people have a non-refundable deposit, and then may also have progress payments, and a clause that says, basically, as we get closer to the date, if you cancel, I'm going to keep the progress payments as well, because the closer to the date, the less likely I'm going to be able to replace that. But then to add in a clause that, you know, what do we agree to do if there's an event outside of our control, like an order from the state that you can't hold events, or, you know, anything to this effect. Even if it's just the pandemic is spiking and raging and people are afraid you can't even get your workers to go into an event like that. So if it's going to be canceled due to something outside of the customer's responsibility, I think the best practice is still provide that a portion of the deposit's non-refundable, because you still have to kind of cover some of your loss, but not make it as big of a penalty as if the customer just chooses to cancel. And it'd be more likely to be kind of, first of all, acceptable to your customers, but also more likely to be upheld by a court if they were to try to challenge that later and say that that's unfair. And then, of course, the idea that you're rescheduling is a difficult thing, because I think so many people had to cancel so many events throughout 2020 that those dates in 2021 are kind of at a premium now. One of the lawsuits that I'm involved in was a venue that didn't have anything in their contract. And when my particular client said, hey, we need to reschedule our wedding because it was during the time when there was a limit of, I think, 20 people, the venue kind of said, well, yeah, you can do that, but there's such a premium upcharge for that, and basically tried to get another $1,500 out of the couple. They said, well, there's nothing in the contract. That case still hasn't gone to trial. It'll probably be in a month or two now. But based on everything I'm seeing, I'm expecting my clients to win on that one, because the venue had nothing in the contract saying what happens if, you know, the state orders us to not have this event. So the idea of upcharging a premium, you know, while I feel that there's that market pressure there, that there's only so many dates open in 2021, and you basically are going to have 2 years worth of events trying to be crammed into 1 year. If you don't have it in the contract, you probably shouldn't try to charge your client for that. And so I like to put in there a clause about if the customer cancels, what is the penalty? If the circumstances just prevent you from being able to go forward with the event, what is the penalty? And then most importantly, one thing I've been adding in too is the right to cancel the contract if you're concerned for your own safety. If you have like a bona fide fear for your own safety, and say you're a photographer and you know that you're sensitive, you have allergies, you have asthma maybe, and you know you're going to be in a bigger deal if you get COVID, and you've been very careful, and the numbers out there are scaring you, and you don't want to go to this event. You know, do you have the right to then you cancel? At that point, you're going to have to refund their money because you're the one canceling, but at least it would give you the right to get out. And I've also written in some clauses that basically say you reserve the right to cancel your service and walk out if you arrive at the venue and they're not taking appropriate safety precautions. Because that was one that I'd heard from a caterer that said, you know, I got there and there was 300 people there and nobody was wearing masks, and my workers started freaking out and not wanting to be there. And, you know, what can I do in the future to kind of give myself the right to go up to the bride and groom and say, look, either these people got to start wearing masks or we're not going to stay here. But it's a lot shakier to do that when you haven't put that in the contract first. So that's a third clause that I've been asked to add sometimes is sort of an escape hatch for if you feel like you're not safe.
That's very helpful. Some were even asking questions with some of the new mandates. Some are, inquiring a lot more cost to be able to do something. For example, caterers now having to buy a bunch more paper products or things normally wouldn't cost them more. What about those that are needing to, the costs are more? Are they allowed to pass that on to their customers now? Or do they need to go ahead and just kind of suck it up and take on those costs themselves?
Yeah, generally, you can always ask. You can always go back and say, hey, I know back when you signed up, this is what the price was. But in the meantime, we've had all these things happening that are going to increase my cost. But if the customer's not willing to sign kind of an amended contract for that, you're probably stuck at the original unless you had something in your contract that would allow you to change your price as your prices change. That's something that I see in a lot of different contexts. I'm not sure I've seen it a lot in these kind of businesses, but basically something that says you see it in construction contracts a lot that say, if our cost of raw materials go up, we may have to amend this contract. And I think it's just something that's not on a lot of these kind of contracts because it's not something you've seen before, whereas in construction, the price of plywood goes up and down every time there's a hurricane, et cetera.
Right.
So people kind of know to build that in. So probably the most careful thing to do would be to put in there that, and you don't want to be perceived as nickel and diming your clients either, and that's kind of the risk you run. But you could put something in the contract that says, the prices of materials, or if something unforeseen causes this to cost more than 10% of, say, on my end of the overhead, that we can renegotiate and we'll agree to pay an applicable percentage more than what our original contract said. The problem that you start to get into is it worthwhile negotiating that with each and every customer? Are you going to scare off customers if they see a clause that says you can change the price on them? Then you're going to have people saying, what? So really at that point, it becomes more of a business decision of, what would you rather do to keep your customers happy while at the same time protecting yourself? And that's why I always say to people that the best thing to do is just go to them and ask them and say, hey, back when I quoted this, I didn't know all these extra costs were going to be involved. Can you work with me on this?
Okay, no, that's helpful information. If we stick to a contract, we've added all these clauses, we've done the best we can to think ahead. What happens if someone doesn't agree with us? So they go ahead and say, write a bad review about us, even though we've stuck to exactly what's been written in our contract. Can that be considered slander if some customer goes out and kind of talks poorly about us?
The difficult part when it comes to slander is you do have a claim for anybody that disparages your business reputation. But there's always a defense as to whether what they're giving is their opinion. And if people phrase things in the form of an opinion, it can be very hard to go after them. If they state a fact in their review that isn't true, then you've got something. And I've certainly pursued lots of cases on that point. But reviews that just say things like, these are terrible people, they're not good to work with or whatever, there's really not much you can do about that. But if they say, they tried to change the price on me and that wasn't in our contract, and it was in the contract, then you've got a claim there. The problem is then you got to file a lawsuit against a former customer, ordering them to take it down and maybe paying some damages. It can be hard to quantify, how that hurts you financially. And so sometimes those cases get filed more just to get the person to take the comment down. And then it usually settles pretty quickly. But yeah, that is a concern anytime you're in a business where you get reviewed, is you're going to get some crazy people that are going to give you a bad review for no reason.
Right. We've all been there. Okay. So let's move on then to, responsibility, liability. Who is responsible ultimately for clients following the mandates, following the protocols, when we've stated clearly our expectations to follow the mandates that are out there?
Yeah, ultimately, your contract is only with your client, right? It's not with any of their guests or any of the other vendors that are going to be at an event. And so you really don't have any leverage directly over those people. Your only leverage is directly with your client to say, look, my contract says you're going to follow all applicable COVID protocols and that you're going to require your guests to, and they're not doing it. And ultimately, if it becomes a big enough issue and enough of a concern, that would be a valid reason to walk away from that event. But in terms of you having any authority to tell other people to put on masks or, to appropriately wash their hands, et cetera, that, you really don't have any leg to stand on there, which is just really, it's something better to think about ahead of time. What are you going to do? What are you going to do if you get to an event and you see that people aren't observing? Because especially I've noticed a huge geographical difference. If you go out to a rural county, you can walk right into a store and most people aren't wearing masks. If you go into a more, suburban town and go in there, everyone's going to be wearing masks. And so the best thing to do is probably think a little bit ahead of time about what are the possibilities and what are you going to do. From a legal perspective, if your contract with your customer says that they're going to follow and require their guests to follow the protocols and they're not, that gives you a ground to walk away. Whether you want to or not, in terms of health advice, I can't speak to that. And in terms of your customer service, that's something that everybody kind of has to answer for themselves is what line is too far to cross,
So have you seen, say, the government or the health department coming after certain vendors or venues for not complying or trying to comply, but then again, their clients are not complying for them?
From what I've seen, they're actively policing, restaurants, bars, retail stores. I've not heard any instances across the state of a wedding or an event being looked at. Because the state's power is really over the fact that they license various businesses and they can kind of threaten to revoke that license. The problem with a wedding is, and probably what keeps them from going there, is first of all, it's a very personal event for the people, and nobody wants to be the bad cop that's breaking up a wedding. But also the fact that you don't really just have one person that you can complain to, because typically there's the venue, there's the caterer, there's the coordinator, there's the photographer, and they're not like operating under one umbrella. And so there's no one person that you can talk to and blame for the fact that people aren't observing protocols. Another thing that reminded me of something that I think we touched on a little earlier is concerns about liability. I have seen some cases already where an employee or a student at a school claims that they contracted COVID in an environment where the protocols weren't being observed. So far, and this is so new in the law that you don't get, normally in the law we like to see cases and we'll see something get decided and then it goes up to the Supreme Court, and so then we all know that's the law of the land. This is also new. We haven't had the luxury of that. But so far, everything I've read in the literature suggests that there's not really a concern with that because of the fact that it's basically going to be impossible to prove where someone got COVID and how they got it. So, if you had an employee that claims, hey, by showing up at this wedding and people weren't observing protocols, I caught COVID and therefore I'm going to try to sue my employer for a dangerous work environment. I don't think those cases are going to have any legs just because of the fact that you can catch COVID a million different ways. How are you going to prove that's when and how you got it?
Right. Okay. In our industry, we have different types of venues. So we have indoor venues, outdoor venues, and those that have different licenses. Do those different types of venues fall under then different mandates because of who they are, whether they're a vendor that has a liquor license or does not have one? I guess some people are asking the question, is there a difference between a private event or, say, a public event in the wedding industry and the umbrella of that?
Okay, so yeah, first part first is, the state of Ohio is constantly updating its requirements, and they do distinguish between indoor service and outdoor service. And they do direct each of the mandates at different industries. So obviously a liquor serving, a liquor permit is going to have different rules than other types of businesses. So you really do need to look And it's been a few weeks since I checked it, but last I saw, there was a specific one for banquets, events, et cetera, for the guidelines there. In terms of private versus public, they're really, from a legal perspective, going to all be considered public type events, because even if there's a private list of people coming, the fact that you're getting paid to do a service for another person means that you're basically offering a public service. And so the practical issue to that is, if you've only got the bride and groom and their closest friends there, the likelihood that anybody's ever going to hear about a non-compliance issue is really low, versus like a retail store that could have a secret shopper coming in. Definitely there's inspectors from the states that do unannounced pop-in inspections that you don't really have to worry about at a wedding. They're not going to be wedding crashers. But from a strict legal perspective, that those guidelines are still all going to apply to you. It's just there's a practical difference with how likely is it ever to get out.
Okay, that makes sense. So as vendors, what rights do we have? At what point can we say, hey, our industry is being targeted right now with a lot of these mandates? We went online and looked at the different advisory boards that are represented to, say, our governor here in Ohio. And there isn't an advisory board right now that represents the smaller event industry. Do you have any suggestions for us as a collective group on how we can kind of speak up or have our voices heard?
Yeah, and that really is the difficulty of being in certain kinds of small businesses, is you don't have your own trade associations. They're going to have their own lobbyists. And I'm not sure, maybe there is some kind of trade association, but if there's not, that's certainly one of the reasons why you kind of see this progression as different industries emerge. They eventually kind of get themselves collected together, get a trade association that is there to promote the interests of that industry as a whole, and then they usually are able to kind of have an advisory/lobbyist with the legislature. And that's just, it takes somebody to have the desire and the drive to really be the one to put all that together. And so normally the pressure from that, though, comes from, hundreds or thousands of individual small business owners that really feel like they don't have a voice or representation. And trade groups are also a good thing. I've advised some trade groups because they can also set some standards for your industry as well. That while they're not the same thing as passing a law, whenever there is an issue in a court case, sometimes that's what we look to, is we say, well, are there trade publications that would say what the standards are in this industry? As an example, in construction, because I do a lot with that, there is a code that talks about, how you have to build a wall and how you have to put on stone, and that there's laws for lots of things like that, but there's nothing for more like customer relationship and cosmetic type things, So for years, it was always a gray area. If you hire a contractor to put on a new room and the walls look really bad, how bad is too bad? There was really no way of answering that, because it's not a health or safety thing that the state would come in and mandate. It's more of a cosmetic type thing. And so eventually the building industry got together and put together a list of specific issues, like if you can still see the nail pops in the wall from 10 feet away in normal lighting, then they're bad. If you can't see them from 10 feet away, they're not bad enough. And gave a lot of specifics, guidance to their own industry. And so that's something that I know retail, service industries have that. Obviously, restaurants and bars and things all have their own trade associations, but I'm not aware if there's any specifically in the wedding industry, at least in our area. Okay.
Do you have any other advice you wanted to share today, or just any other tips that you would want to give to our small businesses that are represented?
The main thing that is kind of something I touched on earlier, which is, just the importance of really having a good rapport with your clients, having good communication with your clients. I think most people out there are reasonable people, and if you come to them and say, look, this is a problem none of us envisioned, how do you want to handle this, and you start that process, typically by the time people come to me, that's broken down. And I would say as much as I feel like I serve a necessary role in society, I don't want anybody to ever have to come to me, with a dispute like this, because that means it's really already gone too far. And so it's the old adage about an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. The better communication you can keep up with your clients and just keep a dialogue going is the best way to stay out of legal trouble. By the time it comes to me, it's usually because communication has broken down, people have gotten angry, people have drawn a line in the sand and refused to be flexible. Ultimately, more often than not, it's worth giving up a little bit with your customer now, but keeping that relationship so that you get that good review rather than, putting your foot down and being difficult to work with and maybe getting a bad review. Maybe you'll still get the few $100s more from that job because you put your foot down, but how much is that costing you in the long run? So just good communication is always key.
That's a great point. We really appreciate you hanging out today and your time. As we are all kind of navigating this season, are you open for business? Are you looking for more clients? We have a huge community of wedding vendors that love to share resources. And so is there a way that they can contact you or connect with you if they're interested in just asking more questions or using you for future services?
Yeah, I'm always in the business of bringing on new clients. Probably the best way to get to me is just look up my website, which is thebryantfirm.com, just my last name, Bryant. And because I've done a lot already, a lot of times I have a form for just about any situation that comes up. And so my goal and what I do is to not necessarily charge you money just to be charging you. If it's something that's only going to take me 10 minutes because I can pull up an old form, then you can get a good new contract done for you for just a couple $100. Because my view is I would rather build those relationships, and because as larger legal issues come, as people need to then buy a new business or sell their business or bring on a partner and do some maybe a little bit more legal intensive stuff, I want to be the one they think of. So my policy has always been to help you, especially small growing businesses, without charging you too much, because I know you're in that growth stage. Because in my industry, just like in yours, it's the customer relationships are everything. And so I don't want people to ever feel scared to call a lawyer to ask for advice because they're worried they're going to get some big crazy bill. I want to be there, and oftentimes if it's just some questions people have, I don't even build them at all. Sometimes people just want to feel better to say, hey, I'm doing this. Is this okay? And just that peace of mind. I'm not going to charge you money to give you peace of mind.
Oh, awesome. Well, we really appreciate it. And thank you again for your time.
All right. Thanks for having me.
That was a wealth of information. Todd, thanks again for sharing with us. He had a lot of things, and I'm sure you took a lot of notes about that. But there's a couple things that really stood out to me. Number one, that was he made sure, and he said this numerous times throughout, you need to over-communicate and set the expectations with your client at the point of booking. If you remember, he said, once they get to me, it's a little rougher territory that we've got to navigate. So make sure that you're over-communicating. Go back and look at your contracts. If you have not rewritten your contract in this last year, you seriously need to take a look at it and make sure you've got the right terms used and covering these new territories that we're navigating through right now.
Greg had the opportunity to interview Craig Kohler the other day with Kohler Catering and talk with him about how he's navigating the COVID pandemic.
Craig, his industry, he's a double whammy, if you would. He's not only a caterer, but he's also a venue. So listen to what Craig had to say in this interview. Craig, you have been in this industry for quite a while, so has Kohler and Presidential. Tell me a little bit about the company.
All right, the company was founded in 1968 by my father, Erwin Kohler, who is still working in the company today. We celebrated our 50 years 2 years ago. We started out as a small caterer in Belmont. At the time, nobody was really doing catering in 1968. Weddings were mostly cake and punch. And it's grown into full sit-down dinners, buffets, etc. In 1978, we built the Presidential Banquet Center. We built the first part of that. And then we began the second part in 1982, which holds up to 700 people, and we can do a total of 4 events at a time at the Presidential, plus what we do on the outside catering. That's it.
So you stay busy, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, we're extremely busy all the time.
Except for this
This last 8 months.
That's right. Non-COVID season, what's your employee count look like for both the cater? Just put them all together, catering and the venue.
There's probably a total of about 35 full-time employees and 150 to 200 part-time employees, which would be the servers, the bartenders, dishwashers, busboys, etc.
Okay. Kind of slow at the moment, but spring's coming and then summer and then fall. What's your schedule look like? How are you booking out there for 2021?
For 2021, a lot of the brides and grooms that had scheduled back in the summer, we have moved their wedding event they have moved their event to 2021. We've had other couples that have been married and had small weddings and are expecting to have a large party, and they're having that in 2021. We've also been booking a lot of 2022. Along back to 2021, there's a lot of brides and grooms that have moved their weddings because they're not able to get a Saturday. They've moved it to Thursday or Friday or a Sunday.
Okay, so Thursday is the new pickup day, you're finding.
Correct.
Okay, all right. So 2022, any suggestions you could make to couples that are out there looking for dates? Any suggestions about 2022?
The biggest suggestion was try to find your place as soon as you can because everything's booking up. We're doing tastings right now for 2022.
Okay.
So
I think 2022 is going to be a phenomenal year. I mean, it's just going to be hands down. And the fall even is going to be jam-packed, as you said. So what we need to know about?
February, the end of February, we're having a bridal show by Claiborne Productions. It runs, I believe, from 10 to 5, and there will not be no gathering. There'll be a controlled setting where only so many people can go through the show at a certain amount of time.
Okay. We actually were at a show last weekend in Cincinnati where they controlled the flow, and it's a much easier way for vendors to deal with the crowds because you don't have those huge, when they open the door and everybody floods in and you're inundated with people. It's just a nice smooth flow throughout the day. So that's a great thing. That's one thing maybe future shows could look at, to make it a lot easier for the vendors as well. So COVID definitely has impacted your business in a very negative way, but you have come up with some ways to bring revenue into Kohler Catering by doing some different things. What are those things you're doing?
What we're doing now is, because we're not allowed to have events, we've come up with some box lunch menus, and we've created some hot box lunch menus, which have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And that's provided a revenue stream for us here lately.
Okay. Well, let's look at the venue side of things. You've got this beautiful facility there in Catering. What changes has COVID made you have to implement to keep the venue going?
I think everybody knows we have to have the 6 feet apart. We have to control people. If there is a buffet, which I want to reiterate, buffets are not allowed at this time. Where there's no gathering at the bar. Masks have to be worn as soon as they enter the building. And sanitation stations are available to the guests.
Okay. Surely this has added cost to your operations, has it not?
Yes, it has added cost to the operation, but we have not increased our prices to cover the increase in cost. For example, gloves have almost quadrupled in price. In the future here, we might have to add some kind of increase in
Okay.
price.
But currently, you've made no cost adjustments to the client.
No, not at this time.
That's amazing. That is amazing. So, this has got to be profitable to keep going year after year after year. How has COVID impacted your profits?
Well, we've lost probably 40% of our business, which we're only doing about 1% profit right now. And we've had help from the PPP loan, which has helped us a lot.
Wow, that's crazy, isn't it? So you have this great crew of staff that's worked with you, a lot of them many, many years. So I'm certain that you've had to back off your staffing. So tell me about your employees. How many have you had to lay off? How many have you furloughed?
We've laid off probably 10 full-time employees. We've only been able to keep maybe 6 servers, giving them very little work. The rest of them have been laid off and they're on unemployment.
Okay. That hurts. That hurts a lot. Hopefully they'll come back.
The big problem is going to be trying to rehire people.
Yeah.
Because they've either gotten jobs somewhere else or moved on. And we've lost probably 20 employees to Amazon.
Really?
A lot of the employees are doing DoorDash, Grubhub, that shipped.
Yeah. Well,
so they've been able to find something else. So hopefully they'll come back, but
yeah,
who knows?
It'll be tough. You're absolutely right. So now that COVID's been here for a year, almost, any event that you've done now during the COVID era, which has not been very many,
Right.
what's the event size like? Is it how much has it shrunk?
We're seeing what their future bookings are probably going to be between 100 and 125, but then we also see other couples that are just doing like a family gathering and tops out maybe about 25 people.
Okay. So you said future bookings are starting to go back up?
Yeah, we're looking future bookings on middle of the summer and the fall. I think we'll be back to the 100, 150 range.
Okay, good. Can't wait for those days, right?
Yeah.
Are you finding it, so you have these events in your venue, what are you finding in the way of the guests that are coming in? Are they complying with the regulations?
At our event center, they are complying because we have instructed our servers on how to handle the dancing or the gatherings at the bar, etc., and it's worked out pretty well.
Okay.
Now, I've been to other venues where our servers it's not our place, so they feel kind of awkward and saying something to the guests.
Okay.
Overall, it goes well.
Good. So, as a venue, the role you're taking is you're just, what? How do you confront a client that's not got a mask on, that's walking around? What do you do?
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
First thing we do is we ask them to comply because of consideration with the other guests. If it becomes too much of a problem, we go ask the parents or whoever's in charge of the event.
Okay. All right. But you're finding people, if you have to confront someone, they're complying.
99.1% they are complying.
Excellent. Well, Chris, financial to do their work. They come in as cake vendors, they come in as DJs and decorators and such. What do you expect of those vendors in the way of the COVID regulations?
Well, we expect them to comply with all the guidelines that are out there. We provide them with a sheet if they can't remember what the guidelines were. We expect them to have their mask on at all times. We expect them to keep their social distancing. If they see a guest that doesn't have their mask on, we expect them to come to one of our servers or captains and inform them that the appropriate action can be taken. That's it.
And you've trained your room captains how to confront someone, correct?
Yes, they've all been trained and they know the guidelines and they know to wear their mask. They know if somebody's not wearing their mask, and they know if there's a problem, they come get the manager. If there's still a problem, then we go to the event coordinator or the bride and groom or the parents of the bride and groom, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, all right. So, a lot of different things here. What could you share with other vendors, to get through this? I mean, you're catching it again from both angles. You're catching it as a venue, you're catching it as a catering company. How, what words of wisdom can you share to another wedding professional that would maybe help them get through this until it's all over?
I would say you're just going to have to be patient. That's what I'm finding right now.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
The news is so, what do you want to say? It's just,
The
I don't know,
news is
you
the
just
news.
get tired
right?
of listening to
Yeah.
the news, and it's not helping things make
Yeah.
anything better.
Yeah. Did you take advantage of any of the grants, the federal funds and such?
Kohler and Presidential have taken, we've gotten 2 PPP loans. We've got a liquor loan from the state of Ohio. We've got, I think that was it. But
Okay.
yeah, I mean, you should take advantage of it right away.
All right. Any advice you could give to anybody out there that hasn't jumped on that?
You need to do it immediately. Find somebody, an accountant or somebody that's familiar with filling out the application, getting into the bank, and crossing all the T's.
Good, good. Craig, thanks for coming in. These are challenging times.
Yeah.
They are, it's not easy. And it's good to know that you are out there taking care of the employees that you can take care of and doing it the right way. So we appreciate that very much.
All right.
Thanks again for coming out today.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Thanks again to Craig and Todd for sharing with us all that wealth of information. Great stuff, great stuff. Again, even Craig's topic, he talked about laying out those expectations, not only for the client, but for the vendors that come into his venue as well. So again, over communicate. You cannot go wrong there when you do that. One of the goals, again, that we want to do here with Perfect Wedding Guide is get you as a wedding vendor out in front of clients, couples. So we're coming up on the end of the end of one of the most busiest engagement seasons, and that's Valentine's Day. That's this Sunday, guys, if you're not aware. And there's going to be a lot of couples that get engaged over this weekend. And the first thing they're going to do is go out and start looking at the resources that are out there. That's where Perfect Wedding Guide can help you get in front of those couples. When people shop, they don't just go to one source. They shop many sources. So you need to be out there in front of as many as you can get. So we're running a special right now that can save you $600 a year on your advertising with Perfect Wedding Guide. So make sure you reach out to us so we can explain that to you. So Emily, we always want to give some things away at the end, don't we?
We do. So today we're going to give away a couple of gift cards to Starbucks coffee. Maybe you could take somebody out for Valentine's Day this weekend.
There
get
you
a cup
go.
of coffee together. So Debria Rice, Sarah Mines, and William Taylor, they're in our chat today. And so we would love to surprise you with a fun little gift.
Super. Enjoy those gifts. They're not good enough for Valentine's Day, though. So, but hey. Anyway, thanks for being with us today. It was a lot of fun. I know you gathered great information. Be sure to reach out to Todd if you're needing that help. And certainly we want to be here to help you as well. We'll see you next month, probably virtually, but as soon as we can get back together face to face, we're going to make that happen as well. Have a great afternoon, everybody.